one day somebody does something unspeakable to someone else, to someone you hardly knew, and you do something about it because you can.
This story comes to us from azfamily.com. A former Gilbert town councilman delivered bombshell allegations saying that for more than a decade, police intentionally falsified crime stats and town leaders knowingly misled the public to save face. For years, Gilbert ranked as one of America's safest cities based on the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program. But some residents now ask whether that reputation was built on misleading data. People in Gilbert say that 10 years ago, town leaders intentionally changed the way emergency calls were reported to make it seem like there was less crime on the streets. While that method is no longer in use, critics argue that the damage has already been done. Former Councilman Bill Spence spoke last month during a public comment, detailing a conversation where he says he had with current town councilman Kenny Buckland, who previously held a leadership role within the Gilbert Police Department. He said Gilbert Police, the police officers and residents, have suffered as a result, said Spence. He went on, during these conversations, he made several concerning comments about Gilbert Police Department policies implemented by former police chief Tim Dorn. And Spence said that about Buckland. Told him that a decade ago, Gilbert Police changed crime reporting protocol by creating a new call category named Priority Zero. He said the chief fudged numbers, said Spence. He talked about bank robberies and collisions were moved out of the highest priority to a different priority. Spence said Priority Zero is not a standard category. Data is typically tracked from Priority 1 through 4. He said the shift drastically altered the appearance of crime in Gilbert. He said, we have 15,000 calls for service. Simply by manipulating the numbers and establishing Priority Zero, we took 14,500 calls and moved them into a different priority, leaving 500 calls for our most severe calls for service. That's a lot of data. The altered data was reported to the FBI, contributing to Gilbert being named the second safest city in America in 2022. He said, I took our response times from 6.31 to 4 minutes, but by nothing but changing the database, Spence said. Spence argues that as crime totals dropped, so did staffing, and the town's reputation came at a cost. At the meeting, Councilman Buckland responded, insisting that the town followed the law. He said, we are talking 12 to 13 years ago. It is true that the former chief did not listen to the software, what it recommended. It is true he went a different direction and created Priority Zero. And it is true that I fought with him over that because I thought that was compromising public safety, our officers, and this public. That was Buckland. He said this was not corruption, and he has pushed to improve staffing since taking office. Arizona's family contacted Buckland by phone and received a text message response. Hi, Austin. I have no interest in publicly discussing a management decision made by former chief who had distinguished career in law enforcement of more than 40 years, as well as a distinguished military career where he served in war for our nation and led troops on the invasion of Iraq. To publicly debate one decision out of hundreds he made that I disagreed with, one decision made more than a decade ago, and that he had the right as a leader to make is ridiculous. I'm disappointed this person would even make such a public display. It was not a matter of corruption, as the citizen implied. The chief believed it was right. I had a different opinion. That's his text message. And like I said, you notice how he says, he was a military leader, a leader in war. He led troops to Iraq. It doesn't make him a good police chief. I mean, not really. The town tells us the decision was made 10 years ago and that policies and procedures have evolved significantly. I'm going to get back to that. They had an entire image to keep up and they didn't care who it victimized, said Gilbert resident Chericia Arnold. For skeptics like Arnold, the revelations reopen old wounds. She said, I lost a lot of trust in town leadership here. She believes her daughter's safety was a casualty of staffing shortages linked to Priority Zero. She said, my daughter was raped and harassed by a kid in her school. I had been asked by the detective at least 3 times if I wanted to press charges against the guy who assaulted my daughter. When you asked me the first time and I said, yes, that's all you needed. But he asked her 2 more times, you get it? Arnold said that after the Priority Zero system was implemented, fewer officers were available and those on duty were stretched thin. She said, for me, when it comes to Priority Zero and how it comes into play, I feel like they needed to drop the case because they didn't have enough officers to investigate it in the first place and do what they needed to do. Now, utilizing the FBI uniform crime reporting data, Gilbert has consistently remained one of the safest communities in the country. Okay. The comments raised during last night's council meeting, without full context, relate to decisions made by a former Gilbert police chief more than 10 years ago. Regardless, since then, our policies and procedures have evolved significantly. Below are our most recent average response times measured from dispatch to officer arrival through September 2025. Please note that while terminology and response times may differ between departments, Gilbert's tracking methods are consistent with other Valley agencies. And that was according to the Gilbert Police Department, that statement. But what I was going to get back to, so they said, look, man, this was 10, 12 years ago. We've evolved since. We're changed. We're different. Okay? Sure. That's what they said about the Phoenix Police Department. Look, we're bringing in the Department of Justice. They're going to investigate the Phoenix PD, and the Phoenix PD has agreed to improve. But they haven't. They haven't improved. In fact, they've pushed back and fought improving from the DOJ. Well, news reports on the Phoenix Police Department show that. Videos from people out there in Phoenix. You know, the bottom line is this political war between politicians and police departments, police chiefs, sheriffs, it's never going to end. Because police chiefs and sheriffs are always going to defend their departments no matter what. They may fire a guy here or a guy there, but in the full scope of it, they're going to always try to justify and defend civil rights violations, policy violations, and crimes committed by their officers and deputies. Why? Because they don't want to be pushed out of office and they want to keep their jobs. That's why. Well, the sheriffs, they don't want to be pushed out of office, and the police chiefs don't want the city manager kicking them to the curb. That's what I'm trying to say. So they're always going to defend their dirty departments. Absolutely.